The rain was drumming against the roof of the black limousine, a sound so rhythmic and cold that it felt like it was trying to drown out the world. I sat in the back seat, my hands folded tightly over my pearls, staring at the wet asphalt of the cemetery gates. When I turned 71, I had millions in the bank. That's when my only son died in a car accident, I whispered to the empty air. My son, David, was my everything. He was the one who had helped me manage the estate after my husband passed, the one who called me every Sunday morning just to hear my voice. Now he was gone, and the silence in his place was deafening. At the funeral service, I could barely stand. I looked across the casket and saw Jessica. She was wearing a designer black dress that cost more than most people earn in a month, and her eyes were dry. She wasn't looking at the casket. She was looking at the guests, measuring their status. When the service ended, I approached her to offer some comfort, but she turned to me with a sharp, calculating smile. Now that David is gone, Martha, we really need to sit down and discuss the maintenance of this lifestyle. The mansion is far too large for one elderly woman, don't you think? I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the rain. I realized then that my son's body wasn't even in the ground yet, and Jessica was already measuring the drapes for her own takeover. I didn't say a word. I simply turned and walked back to my car, knowing that the battle for my peace of mind was just beginning. The mansion felt like a museum of a life I no longer recognized. Every room held a memory of David, his laughter in the kitchen, his focused expression in the study. But now it was just me and the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. I spent the first few nights sitting in the sunroom, staring out at the rose bushes David had helped me plant. The silence was heavy, but it was interrupted by the sound of Jessica's SUV pulling into the driveway just 3 days after the burial. She didn't knock. She had a key David had given her. She walked into the living room, her heels clicking loudly on the marble floor. She didn't ask how I was sleeping or if I needed a meal. Instead, she started opening the cabinets in the dining room, looking at the silver. "I think the estate taxes are going to be a nightmare, Martha," she said, without even looking at me. David hadn't updated his will in years. I've already spoken to a real estate agent. They think we can get a great price for this place if we list it before the market dips. I sat there, my tea getting cold in my hands. I watched her move around my home like she was an insurance adjuster. She talked about we and our interests, but I knew she was only thinking about herself. She suggested that I move into a luxury senior living center in the city, somewhere where I wouldn't have to worry about stairs. I realized she wanted me out of the way so she could liquidate everything. I told her I would think about it, my voice steady and low. She left satisfied, thinking she had already won, unaware that the quiet woman on the sofa was finally seeing her for exactly who she was. I lay awake that night, thinking about how we got here. My husband and I didn't inherit our wealth, we built it. We started with a small hardware store in the valley and turned it into a regional powerhouse. David grew up seeing that hard work. He was a good man, but he was also a soft man when it came to love. When he met Jessica, I saw the change almost immediately. She was beautiful, yes, but she was also incredibly demanding. She slowly started to pull him away from his old friends, from the things he loved doing. She convinced him that everything they did had to be aspirational. I remember one night, years ago, when David came to me asking for a loan for Jessica's interior design business. I gave it to him, of course, because I loved him. But I watched as that business became a bottomless pit for money. Jessica would spend thousands on office decor while the actual business struggled to find clients. Whenever I tried to offer advice, she would give me this look, a look of pity, as if I were a relic from a bygone era who didn't understand modern branding. She manipulated David into believing that her failures were always someone else's fault, or that they just needed more capital to reach the next level. David worked 12-hour days to fund her lifestyle, and I could see the exhaustion in his eyes. He never complained, but I knew. I saw how she used guilt like a weapon, making him feel like he was failing her if he didn't provide more. And now, with David gone, she saw me as the next source to be tapped dry.
The memories of my generosity felt like a bitter pill. For their 10th anniversary, I bought them a vacation home in the Hamptons. Jessica spent 3 months remodeling it, only to decide she hated the ocean breeze and wanted a mountain retreat instead. I paid for David's medical bills when he had that scare 2 years ago, and I even covered the tuition for Jessica's sister to go to graduate school. I never asked for anything in return. I thought that by taking care of them, I was securing a happy family future. I remembered a Thanksgiving dinner where I had mentioned wanting to set up a charitable foundation in David's name. Jessica had laughed, a short, sharp sound. "Charity is for people who have nothing else to do with their money, Martha," she'd said. "We have investments to think about." David had looked down at his plate, clearly embarrassed, but he didn't correct her. She had a way of making her greed sound like practical thinking. I looked at the bank statements from the last year, thousands of dollars transferred from David's accounts into an account I didn't recognize. Jessica had been bleeding him dry long before the accident. She had convinced him to sign papers he didn't fully read, and she was doing the same with me now. She would bring over legal updates for the estate, hoping I would just sign them because I was grieving and tired. But her mistake was thinking that my grief had made me weak. It had actually made me very, very clear-headed. I wasn't just David's mother. I was the woman who had run a multi-million-dollar company for 30 years. I knew how to read a balance sheet better than she ever would. The breaking point came on a Tuesday afternoon. I had returned home early from a luncheon with an old friend. As I walked into the foyer, I heard a noise coming from my private study. I walked softly across the rug and stood at the doorway. There was Jessica. She had my small floor safe open, the one where I kept the deeds and the family jewelry. She was holding my husband's watch, weighing it in her hand, and skimming through my private bank ledgers. She didn't see me at first. She was mumbling something to herself, her face twisted in a look of intense concentration. When she finally looked up and saw me, she didn't even look guilty. She just sighed and set the watch down. "Honestly, Martha, you really should have a more secure system for these things. I was just looking for the property title for the Hamptons house. I have a buyer interested." I stood there, my heart hammering against my ribs, but my face remained a mask of calm. "That house is not for sale, Jessica," I said quietly. She stood up, smoothing her skirt. "We discussed this. It's an unnecessary expense. I've already drafted the power of attorney papers for your health and finances. You're clearly overwhelmed, and it's my duty to David to make sure everything is handled." She tried to walk past me, patting my shoulder as if I were a confused child. "Go have some tea, Martha. I'll take care of the paperwork." That was the moment I knew I had to act. She wasn't just greedy. She was dangerous. She was pathologically entitled to a life she hadn't earned, and she was willing to erase me to get it. The next morning, I didn't call Jessica. I called Robert Henderson. Robert had been my husband's lawyer for 40 years and was one of the few people I trusted implicitly. We met in a quiet corner of a local library, away from prying eyes. I showed him the papers Jessica had been trying to get me to sign. Robert looked through them, his brow furrowing. "Martha, if you had signed these, she would have had the authority to sell your house, move your funds, and even place you in a facility against your will." My blood ran cold, but I stayed focused. We spent the next 4 hours going through every account. We discovered that Jessica had already attempted to transfer a large sum from David's life insurance policy into a personal trust she had set up in the Cayman Islands. She had even forged my signature on a preliminary intent to sell the mansion. Robert looked at me over his glasses. "What do you want to do? We can file charges for the forgery." I shook my head slowly. "No, Robert. I want her to think she's winning until the very second it all disappears. I want a quiet revenge." We worked together to restructure everything. I moved all my primary assets into a private foundation dedicated to supporting the children's hospital David had loved. I changed my will to leave Jessica exactly $1, a sum that would prevent her from contesting the will by claiming she was accidentally omitted. I revoked her access to all accounts
and set up a new security system for the mansion. By the time I left the library, Jessica was technically penniless in terms of my estate, but she had no idea.
I invited Jessica to the mansion for a formal dinner on Friday night. I told her it was to finalizing the transition. She arrived looking triumphant, carrying a leather briefcase. She had even brought a bottle of expensive champagne, which I knew she had charged to my account at the local wine shop. We sat in the formal dining room, the same room where she had tried to inventory my silver. The candles were lit, and the atmosphere was eerie. Jessica was in high spirits, talking about the new chapter for both of us. I found a lovely penthouse for myself in the city, Martha, and the senior living village I found for you has a wonderful garden. You'll be so much happier not having to worry about all this space. I let her talk. I let her go on about her plans for the money, about the trips she wanted to take, about how proud David would be of how she was handling things. It was nauseating to hear her use my son's name to justify her greed. When the main course was finished, she pushed her plate aside and opened her briefcase. "Let's get the signatures out of the way so we can celebrate." She slid a stack of documents across the table toward me. I didn't reach for them. Instead, I took a small, elegant folder from the sideboard behind me and placed it in front of her. "Before we sign your papers, Jessica, I think you should take a look at these. They are the new organizational documents for the David Sterling Foundation." Jessica frowned, opening the folder. As she read, the color slowly drained from her face. Her hands began to shake. "What is this? This has all the assets? The mansion, the Hamptons house, the investment accounts? They've all been transferred to a nonprofit?" I nodded calmly, taking a slow sip of my water. Yes, David always wanted to do more for the children's hospital. I realized that the best way to honor him wasn't by hoarding wealth, but by giving it to those who truly need it. Jessica stood up, her chair screeching against the floor. "You can't do this. That's my inheritance. That money belongs to me." I looked her directly in the eye, my voice cold and steady. "No, Jessica. That money belongs to the woman who earned it, and as of this morning, all your access to my accounts has been revoked. I am also aware of the forgery on the intent to sell. My lawyer has the originals. If you ever attempt to contact me again, or if you try to contest this, those documents go straight to the district attorney." She looked like she wanted to scream, but no sound came out. She was trapped. She had built her entire future on a foundation of theft and manipulation, and I had just pulled the rug out from under her. She realized then that she had nothing. No penthouse, no designer lifestyle, and no more access to my life. "You're a monster," she hissed. I stood up, smoothing the front of my dress. "No, Jessica. I am a mother who is finally protecting her son's legacy from the person who tried to destroy it. Please leave my house. The locks have already been changed." Jessica left that night in a flurry of quiet rage, and I never saw her again. I heard through the grapevine that she had to sell her designer wardrobe just to pay off her credit card debts. She eventually moved back to her hometown to live with her sister, far away from the world she had tried to steal. As for me, the mansion is no longer a museum of grief. I sold it a few months later, not because Jessica wanted me to, but because I was ready for something new. I bought a small, beautiful cottage near the children's hospital where I now spend my Tuesday afternoons volunteering. Every time I see a child smile or see a new piece of medical equipment with David's name on it, I know I made the right choice. My life at 71 isn't what I expected it to be. I lost my son, and for a while, I lost my peace. But in standing up for myself, I found a strength I didn't know I had. I have millions in the bank for the causes I love, and a heart that is finally at rest. The silence in my new home isn't heavy or cold anymore. It's peaceful. I sit on my porch as the sun sets, a cup of tea in my hands, and I know that David is looking down, smiling. I kept my dignity, I kept my power, and I kept his memory pure. That is the greatest wealth I could ever have.